Welcome to the Illuminated Path podcast. I'm your host, Liv, founder of Eno Wellness Collective. My wellness journey started with yoga, which led me down the path of exploring healing modalities like meditation, breath work, sound healing, mindset work, and so much more. This exploration inspired my mission to help others find what lights them up. Get comfortable and curious as we learn from experts, teachers, and creators who are lighting up their communities and living an inspired, expansive life. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of the Illuminated Path podcast. And this one is going to be a slightly different solo episode. And I actually have gone back and forth quite a bit, deciding whether or not I even share this. And as you can tell, with my voice being shaky already, it's going to be a tough one. But I have felt the call to really share this part of my story with you all. Because I do know that the right people who might need to hear this story will find it. So if you're listening and someone has sent you this episode, or you were looking for an episode on this topic and you came across it, I just want to thank you for being here. And this, as I mentioned, I was going back and forth on, do I publish this? Do I not? Do I share this? Do I not? But something kept telling me, you've got to share it. So with that, in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my recent experience with loss, in particular, pregnancy loss. And with that, I want to invite you to think about whether it makes sense for you to listen to this episode or not. If you've had pregnancy loss before and you think this might be traumatic to listen to, feel free to just move on to the next episode. If for any reason you feel like this might not be the topic for you, move on to the next episode. And I just want to put that out there that this is completely my experience, my opinion, and something that I've learned in this process is that everybody's story is so different, and just honoring that. And so as I put this story out into a bigger audience, I just want to caveat with that this is my story and something that I feel, as I mentioned, really called to share. So I want to start off with sharing a little bit about before the pregnancy loss happened. So I found out that I was pregnant. So this is my second child. I have one really wild 2-year old going on 2.5. His name is Sky. And my husband and I, knew that we wanted to have a second kid. We didn't know when. We didn't, we weren't really stuck on the timing had to be a certain way, but when I found out that I was pregnant back in May of this year, I think pregnancy is really this portal where once you find out you're pregnant, like everything changes in an instant. Like seeing that positive pregnancy test, like your whole world changes. All of a sudden, your timeline is clear on like what the next, 9 months will be like, what the next year will be like. Like just everything changes. Your priorities change. Just it is really such this portal that literally happens in an instant. And so when I found out I was pregnant, I was obviously super excited. Actually took like 2 tests. The first test, the line was like really light, but I was feeling a lot of the symptoms. And so I was like, let me just take another test just to be sure. And so I took another one later that day. And sure enough, there were, the lines that showed I was pregnant. And so that first trimester was pretty tough. I was lucky that with my first pregnancy, I really wasn't that sick during my first trimester. And everyone said, like, oh, you're having a boy, which I did. But I really didn't have a lot of the symptoms and signs in my first pregnancy that I did with this. And I was definitely feeling it this time. I was feeling super nauseous, feeling super sick, definitely feeling that fatigue. A funny thing that didn't happen with my first pregnancy, but happened with this was the aversion to coffee. Like all of a sudden, I always have a cup of coffee in the morning. It's like my morning ritual. And all of a sudden, when I found out I was pregnant, I just could not stand the smell of coffee. I was like, ugh, get that away from me, which is was so strange, right? That first trimester, I was just definitely like just feeling all of the feelings, feeling all the feelings, feeling all the emotions, feeling all the hormones, feeling all of the, the symptoms that go with it. And it was really interesting timing because, I was right in the middle of planning, Wellfest, which is my wellness festival that happens every year in June. And I was right in the middle of that. I was also in the process of planning a retreat at the time. And so those were two events in particular, the, Well Fest and then the retreat in Palau that I had to start to let a couple of people know because I had to let my team know, like, hey, this is what's going on. FYI, I can't be, picking up and, being as physically supportive as I normally would. And even for the retreat, I had to reschedule it because the date that it was set would be a time that I wouldn't be able to travel anymore. So I basically had to let the retreat participants know, like, hey, I'm going to actually be moving the retreat, to back to September instead of January, which is when I would be due. And so that was, the early, very early decisions of having to also get a couple of people involved because it was impacting, what was showing up in my business. And I remember going in for that first appointment, first time to go see a midwife, and they were able to find the heartbeat. And for those who have been pregnant before and have had that experience of like finding the heartbeat, it's such a special moment, right? To have the, to be like, okay, all these symptoms aren't just in my head, right? There's actually a baby inside there, and there's actually a heartbeat inside. So at that time, we weren't able to get an ultrasound, not yet, but we were able to at least hear the heartbeat and had set our next appointment, which was going to be for the second trimester. So, I had, Wellfest. I was able to tell my team that. I started to slowly start to tell my family a little right after I hit the end of the first trimester. And I always remember thinking, and this is everyone's so different with when they decide to tell people that they're pregnant, right? Some people tell people right away. Some people want to wait till after the first trimester. Some people don't, wait until way longer. But I remember thinking to myself at one point, like, I'll just wait until after the first trimester. And I don't know where I've gotten this thought or belief, but I always thought like, telling people that I was pregnant early on, even with my first, thought, don't tell anyone that I wouldn't want to tell if I had a miscarriage. I had that idea, that thought. I never thought I'd have to actually put that into action. But I remember hearing, before just before any of this happened, I remember hearing someone say like, don't keep it to yourself because in case you do have a miscarriage, you're going to need those people, right? You're going to need, you're going to need those people. So one of the things that I started to do is start to tell my family, start to tell my friends, my close, like inner circle of friends, told, people who needed to know on a need to know basis when it came to my business. Uh, but one of the big, things that very clearly remember thinking of is right after Wellfest, I had my Bali retreat. So we traveled to Bali, and I remember going around in that opening circle, and everyone was sharing, why they were there and what they were hoping to get out of the experience. And God, that Bali group was such a special, powerful group. Every retreat is, but in particular, the Bali retreat is always such a magical place to do that type of transformation and that type of work. And I remember sharing with the group saying, I'm moving through a big transition. And I had shared with everyone that I was pregnant, just kind of keeping it within the Bali sister circle, keeping it at the retreat. But just so people knew, right? As I was going to teach yoga, like I was going to modify some things, or I was going to maybe not model as much as I typically, or demo as much as I typically do. And I just felt like it was important to tell them that, this was versus, being sick behind the scenes or saying I couldn't do certain things because, I just didn't feel like hiding it. And at that point, I was already past the 12th week mark. So I was already heading into that second trimester. And I really do believe that my time in Bali prepared me for this because after the retreat, I want to say 3 weeks or so that we were just in Bali in Uluwatu, and I was just taking care of myself. I was, just eating well, sleeping well, like all the self care, all the amazing things to do in Bali. And we were able to get some childcare. So my husband and I were able to have some date nights and just be able to really think about the future, talk about the future. I was able to really celebrate like two big things that were done, which were Enaval Fest and Bali. And I was able to just nurture myself. And Bali is really so healing for me. It always is. That's why I keep going back. And I didn't realize at the time that I think I was really preparing myself for the news of what would happen when I got back. And when I got back, was when all of this happened. So the day after I got home, we had our 16-week appointment. And this was definitely an appointment that I was thinking would go completely a different way. And so we went in and, had our usual doctor, questionnaire of how am I feeling and, what's happening with the body, getting my weight, getting my blood pressure, things like that. And from being really sick in the first trimester to now being in the second trimester and like feeling the energy start to come back, I was feeling like a baby bump starting to come out. Was feeling all of the symptoms, right? All of the symptoms of the second trimester and just of being pregnant. And I remember the doctor saying, like, oh, that's, it's great to hear, right? It's all good news. I'm feeling good. No symptoms are concerning. Everything is looking good. Right. So then she was like, hop on the table and let's look at the heartbeat. We were still a couple weeks away from when we could find out the gender and do like the anatomy scan, which is typically at 20 weeks. And so it popped up on the table. And I remember her like, looking for the heartbeat and just kind of not being able to find it right away. But was like, okay, maybe like let's try a different angle. Let's try something else. And then I remember when she said like, "Oh, I'm actually going to bring the other doctor in because she has more experience with this machine, so she'll be able to find it." And then I remember the other doctor coming in, and when she was struggling to find the heartbeat, that's when I knew something was up. And I remember trying to stay super, super calm. Something activated in me where I was like, this is where all the tools come in, right? This is where the breathing comes in. This is where the yoga comes in. I was like, I need to just remain calm, right? Because that is literally every mom slash pregnant mom's worst nightmare, right? Is going in and not being able to hear the heartbeat. So from that moment, it really was such a whirlwind. Like, I feel like that day felt like so long and so short at the same time. But they basically were like, okay, we're going to send you somewhere else and have you do an ultrasound there. And then we'll go from there. Right. But there was still hope. It was like, okay, maybe if we do another ultrasound, there's going to be another option. And I remember just really wanting that news and wanting that information so fast. Like the time that you have to wait to get that, it just felt like hours, right? And it was hours. Like we went to go get the ultrasound. They were like, oh, we could see you in like an hour and a half. And I was like, oh my gosh. So the first place we went said like, oh, we can see you at 3 o'clock today. And it was like 10 a.m. I was like, no way. So even just that process of like, I'm trying to find out what has happened, it just felt so long and drawn out. And I remember specifically the woman that did the ultrasound, like when we came in, it was very like matter of fact. It was like, okay, get on the table, like just not no not very warm. It was just very like, okay, medical, right? And I remember feeling like, oh, okay, she's her energy feels kind of intense or like kind of harsh. But then I remember as she was doing the ultrasound, and she's not able to show me what's on there. Like I'm not able to see, okay, is there a heartbeat? I can't see the screen. But I remember she all of a sudden started to be a little bit nicer. She started like after what I imagined, was the I can't see anything. um, she started to be a little bit nicer. And then that's when I knew that this was not good news. And she had said, your doctor will get in touch with you. They'll be able to go through the results and all of that. So that even just that process, right, of knowing that like there are results, but I don't know them was really hard. And then having that experience going back, to the clinic, getting that news was really really tough. But I do remember the midwife and the doctor that were there, who I do know, uh, were just so compassionate and just held space in a really special way. So I just want to thank them for that, because I know that's not always the case. I'm lucky that I do, know who my doctor is. So that felt, you know, it felt more comforting to have a situation like that. And I remember, I was at the time having my mom watch my son while we went to the doctor. And, we had to tell her, hey, we're going to be a little bit longer. We're going to go get an ultrasound, but not wanting to like alert her of anything yet before we actually knew what the situation was. And I remember just really, really dreading going home to share that news, because that was totally not what I expected. Definitely not what she expected. I think she thought we went to lunch and we were coming back, just kind of enjoying having some childcare. But that was really, really tough. Having to come home and then tell my mom, who was like so supportive and so loving. But you just never think like that you have this whole experience was just very much like, I'll never have to do that. So as I mentioned before, pregnancy really is a portal. And just as it becomes so fast for the day you find out that you're pregnant, and then all of the things that come from that, all of like the mindset shifts and priorities change. I would say the same thing is the day you find out that you're not pregnant anymore. It also becomes this portal. And when once we found out that, what I had was basically called a missed miscarriage, where I didn't even know this was a thing and had never even heard of that term before. Sometimes it's called a silent miscarriage, but it's basically like the body doesn't recognize that you're not pregnant anymore. The body still thinks that you're pregnant. The body still has the symptoms. That's why I was feeling the way that I was. That's why the body thought that I was pregnant, but the baby had stopped developing a few weeks ago. So there was just this, and I do so much work around the connection in the body. And to have that experience of like my body not recognizing that there was no longer like a heartbeat and there was no longer a life, that was really confusing for me. That was really a confusing, thing. And also just I never even knew, as I mentioned, like never even knew that could even happen. I always thought a miscarriage was like very obvious. Like had symptoms, they started bleeding. There was like something that happened that like signaled, oh, this is a miscarriage, right? Not the body not knowing. And so the decisions had to be made very, very quickly from there. The option to have basically force a miscarriage at home versus going to, have some type of surgery. And I opted, my personal decision was to do that at home. I just felt like I wanted to be in the comfort of my own home. I didn't want to be in a medical setting. I wanted to be comfortable. I just wanted to have some control of what that experience would look like. So that was my decision. I remember them asking me like, "Do you want to wait a couple days or do you want to like, see if the body triggers the miscarriage on its own?" So I waited a little bit of time. I waited a couple days and I remember, just clearing my calendar and just feeling so grateful that I could do that, right? That I work for myself, that I have my own business, that I have the freedom and the flexibility that I didn't have to go into work the next day. And I can imagine like, I know so many women go through this and just have to go in the next day and no one knows what's going on. I feel really lucky that I was able to clear my calendar, clear my schedule, cancel some things, move things around so that I could give myself the space. So I want to say we found out on a Thursday, and then I decided to go to have, take the medication and do the process the following week. So that time in between was also kind of a whirlwind. It like really didn't feel real. And I didn't tell people at the start. I kind of wanted to sit with it. I kind of wanted to just process it a little bit on my own. I felt like really going inward. So I know some people, want to tell people and have all the support right away, but part of me just felt a little numb and just wanted to, sit with it myself. My fear at that time, though, was like running into someone who I had told that I was pregnant and having to like break that news to them. So I felt very like I don't want to go out, I don't want to see people, I don't want to go to events. I like was really trying to avoid having that situation happen where someone would like say, "Oh my gosh, like I heard you're pregnant," or "Congratulations." And so yeah, I definitely kind of went into a little bit of a bubble. And two things I remember happening just I feel like it was in that week that was just, I just vividly remember them being super painful unexpectedly, which was, and when I was in Bali the week before I found out of this news, I had done a photo shoot. And I remember even telling the photo shoot, like the photographer and the stylist that helped me, like I told them I was pregnant and we were trying to find outfits that would like conceal it. And we were trying to like get shots that didn't show, the stomach. And, the photographer, as we were, playing around and on the shoot was like, let's just get a couple little baby bump photos, like so hold the belly and like these kind of like she's like we were joking around that it would be like a mini maternity shoot. And at the same time, I was working with a stylist that was helping me pull some outfits for a big keynote that I was set to do like a month later. And I had told her, like, I'm going to be, I think I was going to be very pregnant at the time of the keynote. And so I told her, I was like, I really want I really want outfits that really would accentuate the bump and, like, kind of show that, like, make it very obvious that I was pregnant. And I remember getting, like, right after hearing, like, finding out the news of the miscarriage, getting a link to those photos and just not being able to go through them, just being like, wow. Like at the same time, and I'm gonna share this photo, but there is a photo that she took that was me like putting my hands not on my belly, but just like right over them, almost like hovering over my belly. And like the sun is behind it, and there's like a little rainbow that was like little prism, like that was captured. And I was like, oh my God, this is wild. So yeah, those photos were really hard to receive. And, she typically requires edits like right after, like any, pick your favorite ones, within 48 hours. And I just told her, I was like, I'm gonna need some more time for this. And with my stylist, that was helping me pull the outfits for the keynote. She also sent me like a whole lookbook of like bump friendly outfits. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to revisit everything. And, those two who were just like such little angels during this were also so comforting, right? Of like, you just don't want to have to share that news, especially with people that you're not that close with, right? It's like people that you're working with or you've hired or like a coach. And I feel like I had to really be super vulnerable with them. And they were so, again, so compassionate, so gracious, and just respectful of the whole process. And so then came the process of telling people. And I told some people before I had actually taken the medication and like started the process. And then I told some people after, once it was like already done. I think I didn't like update my family, like my wider family, until afterwards, and just told my best friend obviously like right away. But I wanted to talk about that because I know that probably some people who are listening who have had the experience of having a miscarriage know that like some people know how to show up for you in big ways, and other people just don't, and just don't have the capacity to show up, or maybe don't know how. Or I think a lot of people go through a situation like a miscarriage, like in isolation a lot of the times. And some of that is because I don't want to share it, but even when sharing it, there's certain people that will really shine and do things that are just so needed and so like helpful. And then other times you'll feel like, oh, I thought that person maybe would have showed up in a bigger way. And that's just something I wanted to call out, right? Because there's going to be people that really go above and beyond. And then I noticed that there's some people, very close to me, very, very close to me, that haven't even really asked, like, how are you? That just like you see them the next time and it's like business as usual. And I remember in particular, like had a therapy appointment scheduled like for right after I got back from Bali. I'd been going to a therapist, therapy for a couple months. And when I talked to her, I was like, thank God I have this appointment, because she had no idea what was going on. I hadn't talked to her like all the time I was in Bali. Last time I had talked was like a month and a half ago. So she was expecting me to come in, I don't know what she was expecting, but was definitely not expecting that. But I was really happy that I had support in that way, like had a therapist, had, friends and family members that were able to show up in the ways that I needed them. And for me, it really wasn't like, as I mentioned, I kind of felt very introverted, very like I want to go in my little cocoon and just hide. But so I noticed, and I remember my therapist asking me, like, what kind of support means the most to you right now? And it wasn't like the text check-ins, how are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? Like, it wasn't that. It was like the little like gestures, the little like thoughtful gestures. And I remember um, one of my friends who has been on the podcast before, his name is Josh. He showed up to my yoga class after I told him with like a flower and a card. I was like, that is so sweet. The next week, he showed up at my yoga class and had like a gift card for coffee. I had another friend of mine, Abby, um, bring me chocolate, with just like a little note about how sometimes you just need chocolate. I had one of my coaching clients who I had to tell, also because she was going to be at the retreat, and she just wrote a card, right? Like a handwritten card, like slipped it to me after one of my events. I had one of my aunts drop off food the day of that I was taking the medication. My sister sent me a gift card for comfort food. My mom was like cooking up a storm, like making sure that like we were fed, like that food was like not something that we had to think about. And even, one of my really good friends, Ellie, I remember because I was just with her in Bali, like that we were just had a reunion there. And I just remember the power of like, long distance friendship is just so beautiful. I have so many friends that live all over the place that really aren't here that showed up in really beautiful ways. And I remember specifically Ellie, like she just started off the text with like, no need to respond. And at that time, that was really important for me of just like not needing to feel like I had to respond or someone was waiting for my response, like, but just having that, like, no need to respond. I'm thinking of you, like, I'm sending you love. Um, and that was really a huge thing for me. So if you do know someone that is, going through this type of loss, and maybe don't know how to support or don't know like what could be helpful. I think just that thoughtfulness, right? Of like no expectation, no responsibility, no pressure, but just thoughtfulness goes such a huge, huge way. So I will save, everyone any graphic details of the experience, but I will say that it definitely was a very physically traumatic experience for me, and when you look on, I remember thinking about preparing for like the day and the process and just looking for support, I was on like TikTok, I was I was like trying to find like who could podcast, like who has had this experience that can like give me insight into it because it is such like isolating experience as it is like having a miscarriage and then having a missed miscarriage where I'm like who else has experienced this, and then even beyond that being like who has taken this medication, what has the process been, and even that, go when you look at what people have said or shared about it, everyone has different experiences. Everything from like, oh, it's just going to be cramps, and to like, oh, it feels like you're going through labor, and just knowing that everybody is completely different, right? And everybody's experience is different. Everyone's pain tolerance is different. But I definitely had a pretty, yeah, just physically traumatic experience. And I think it is. I don't know if there's any science to this, but I know that, oftentimes after you give birth or have like go through labor, like women forget what happens, right? By design. I think that's like how we're built, right? So that there's more people have kids again. And I kind of think it's the same thing here. Probably a mix of trauma and also just the experience, but kind of black out the experience because you're like, I'm not sure if I can go there. And so I knew after the process was done, that I was gonna have to really call in like all my healing tools. I was like, this is what I do, right? I was looking at how do I heal physically, how do I heal emotionally, and I'll share some of those resources, especially if you're on Guam and you're looking for some support in that way. I remember thinking, so let's see, I think the process happened over like a Friday and Saturday, and then on Monday I taught yoga. And I remember, some people were like, "Are you sure you're okay to teach yoga?" But honestly, being on my yoga mat was so healing because going through an experience like that is can really disconnect you from your body, especially at that missed miscarriage situation, right? Of like, my body doesn't know that I'm not pregnant anymore and it's not recognizing it. You can feel just really disconnected from it. And for me, being on my yoga mat was healing because it allowed me to connect with my body again. It allowed me to breathe. I was like, this is how I start my healing process, which is what I do and what I teach. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to tell some people that come to my yoga class that do know that I'm pregnant. So that also kind of kick-started me sharing, like, okay, this is the situation. And luckily, the people that, I think the Ina wellness community are like literally stepped up in such beautiful ways. The people that I did share it with, like some of my clients or some of my retreat ladies, and even just sharing it with the Bali's group, the retreat group, like just how the sweet messages and thoughtfulness that came through that was just so beautiful, and I really didn't expect it. And so, yeah, part of my physical healing was definitely getting back on my yoga mat, um, starting to just physically feel strong again. I did decide to start looking to acupuncture. I'd always been curious about acupuncture, so I wanted to start that journey and even, I started going to Valley Moon acupuncture if you're here on Guam. Shout out to them. And then I knew I was like I booked a massage. ASAP with Mary from Earth Star Holistic Health. If you're on Guam, you know Mary and you know that Earth Star. And I just knew that that would be a really safe space for me to be. I've always really loved treatments with her, and just fusing energy work and massage, and just we had gone through our doula training together, and so I just knew like that was a space when I was ready, that I needed to be back into. Um, and I think I started so much with that focus on the physical healing because that was really like what I had control over. I was like, okay, how do I heal physically? How does my connect to my body? But I did feel pretty numb emotionally in the beginning, and I just didn't let myself. It came in waves. I was definitely allowed myself to be emotional, but I also felt just numb. And I'm sure that some people who are listening that have had this experience, like, have had that too. But I remember some really, someone one of my good friends, Akina, who has dealt with grief before of losing someone in her life. And I remember she said like it really goes in waves. So I had to like reach out during the waves. Um, I was also really tuned in to what I was saying yes to and what I was saying no to. And so I still felt called to do my classes, even to put on an event. Like I had my full moon flow like a week and a half after. That all felt good, but I noticed the first things that felt like, oh, I don't think I can do that. I was supposed to lead a workshop at a doula training and attend like an advanced doula training because I had done the sort of beginner version of it before, and I had to cancel that. I just knew I couldn't be in that space. I couldn't get up and teach. I couldn't be around like that. Just not yet. And I also had a prenatal yoga class that I was set to teach at the end of August, at the end of the month, and I had to cancel that too. And just really honoring that, right? And I had to tell those people, I told the trainer, I told the person I collaborate with for the yoga class, I said, this is what happened. And, I can't, not yet, right? I say yes to a lot, and I really have continued to show up for my clients and showed up for my, a lot of parts of my work, but specifically being around like pregnant women or teaching prenatal yoga when I thought I would be pregnant, attending this advanced doula training because I thought I would be pregnant and wanting to learn for myself as well. Like those just felt like just like a little tender. I was able to sit down with Stevie, who's the founder of Birth Workers of Color. She's the one that leads the doula training, and she was so. I remember during doing the first training, she talked about how she supported a lot of people through loss, like a lot of people through loss. And so I definitely felt called to, while I did cancel the leading a workshop, she did reach out and was like, let's grab, coffee, let's do something while she was on island, and just sitting down with her, talking to her, she gave such powerful, advice and guidance and just from what she had seen and experienced. And so just finding those people and those spaces that just get it and like can hold space for you, not to be like, okay, let's, let me cry and just be emotional in front of you, but just to hold space, just to be there, and people who get it. And that's like a reason why I decided to record this episode, is because as I was going through it, I was just searching for people that also got it or understood it, and were sharing their stories. The other thing that was coming up that I decided to move forward with was, I think a few weeks before I found out about this, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at a big event here, Fanatsu Famalawan, and I was so excited. I was so excited for the opportunity. Was like really wanting to spend August and September like really locked into like preparing and thinking about what I wanted, practicing and thinking about what I wanted to say. And I remember hearing this news and thinking like, oh, can I still do that? Right? Like, should I still do that? Should I like cancel? Should I like give myself more time to heal? And I kept hearing like, use your voice, use your voice, use your voice. And so a lot of the behind the scenes of preparation for that keynote was a lot of just healing and like being vulnerable and using my voice. And a lot of actually the theme of the keynote was around the lotus flower process and like going through the mud and going through these really like hard, dark moments and using that as soil for something bigger. And so I used this experience really as inspiration for what I ended up saying. So with that, that was that whole experience of, the initial healing was happening in August, and then September rolls around, and that's when my retreat was going to be, the one that I had moved, the one that was going to be in January. And I was like, okay, I'm going to move it back to September, because I, thought I thought this would be my, last weeks to travel. I thought that I would be just like in a very different place at this time. And up until now, all the retreats since my son has been born, I'd always had my family there with me. So my little one was with me, my husband was with me. I was breastfeeding, and Palau was going to be the first retreat where I didn't have them, where I was just going to be going solo. And I knew that it was going to be healing. Palau is just a very healing place. It's just nature, like immersion. But it was quite a hard retreat for me because it was the first time I had been there too, or not been there, but first time I had done a retreat there. So it's all like, very much a learning experience. Some things go smoothly, some things like, there's always room for optimization with every retreat. But I feel like I really had to be really, really on during this one. And at the same time, I was, grieving behind the scenes of like, I thought I would be in a different stage at this retreat. And I remember thinking when we were doing like a big tour around a big boat trip out, seeing the rock islands, looking out at nature, looking out the water. And I remember thinking that day, it was like day 3 of the retreat. I remember thinking like, if you're around, show me a sign, right? Like if you're here, show me a sign. And, I heard from a lot of people that rainbows are, a sign, can be a sign. And I kept thinking that day, like, if you're here, like, show me a sign, show me a sign. And the next day, our closing circle, and I actually didn't tell this to anybody, but I was thinking of telling it to the retreat group, but there was a lot of, emotion already charged within the group from other things. So decided to keep it to myself. I really wanted to hold space for the people there and just kind of honor the experience. But that closing circle, I look out and it's just the most magical, sunset. And then we see a double rainbow. And I have beautiful photos of this too, because I was like, someone take a photo of that. And it was just such confirmation of like, they're here, they're here. Um, so yeah, having that while Palau was challenging in many ways, it was also very healing for me just to be able to do that solo and to be there solo. When I came back, it was right into doing the keynote. And I remember thinking, like, so many people here, they're coming up to me, giving such amazing, congratulations, like everything's amazing. Like, but so many people didn't know behind the scenes of what I was experiencing. And I think that is what's something that inspired me to share even more, because I remember being on a coaching call, a mastermind call that I'm in right now. I remember someone on the call was like, "Oh my God, everything's been just thriving for you. You have your retreat, you have your, keynote, your retreats are selling out." Like she was just like, "Wow, things are just like on fire for you." And I remember thinking, like, yes, and there's also a big, huge personal thing happening behind the scenes that like no one knows about. And you just never know what people are dealing with, in the background. And that has been something I've been thinking about a lot through this experience of like, so many people are holding things behind the scenes that you'll never see in public. And just to be kind, right? To be kind, to be compassionate, to be thoughtful, to just know that like people are bringing things with them that you may not see on the surface. So the thing I wanted to kind of close with is this has definitely been one of the biggest, most complicated things to grieve. It's complex. And I think anyone that has had a miscarriage can attest to that because you're grieving the loss of something, you're grieving the loss of what it potentially could have been. And at the same time, your body's just going through this crazy, crazy experience of like hormone drop and just physical symptoms. And like, I just didn't expect to have just that full spectrum experience of like, I'm not just grieving emotionally and, you know, going through processing a loss, but my body is like wild right now. And one thing I didn't mention is like up until the miscarriage, I had been breastfeeding and I stopped breastfeeding like during that process because of like not, the medication and not being able to do that. And then um just deciding that was like, the time to stop. And so I think that like stopping to breastfeed plus having that was just hormones just um felt wild. I can't use another word than that because it really just was, right? And so just that complex grief, and just thinking about like so many people go through this alone, so many people don't share it or don't have people that can support them. And so if you're listening to this and you have gone through loss, like I hope that you find some comfort in hearing, a story. Maybe some of it resonates with you, maybe some of it doesn't, but um, I had my intuition really came through super loud and clear during this experience. And I don't know, maybe it was a way of coping, but something about I do really, really vividly remember being in that doctor's office, like when we couldn't find the heartbeat, and like that moment of really trying to calm myself, like bringing in all the tools, right? And just thinking like, I'm going through this for a reason. I'm going through this for a reason. Like there is a reason, there is a reason. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I do feel like I am trying to alchemize this experience as much as possible and like feel it, really feel it, like not push it down. Obviously, I've been like crying through this entire episode, so really let it through, but also like see how I can turn it and transform it into something that can be healing. Um, I work with all my clients through major life transitions, and I also talk all the time about shadow and light and like needing the winter, needing the mud, needing like the mess in order to really understand the light. And I didn't expect to have like this winter season this year at this time in the midst of everything happening. But I know that there's a reason. Fully trust that, our baby will be in our lives in the future at some point. But I do feel like this experience has like shaped and changed me in so many ways. And even sharing this is a huge, huge thing. Like so many times I was like, no, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't. But I was like, just press play and see what comes out. And so if you're still listening, I just want to thank you for being here. If this resonated with you or you've experienced loss before, drop into my DMs, share with me. I'd love to hear how it resonates. And if there's someone who you think might benefit from hearing this, definitely forward it to them. So, with that, thank you all for being here and for being an open listening ear during this hard time. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please rate and review, and don't forget to subscribe. Learn more at enowellnesscollective.com and connect with us on Instagram at enowellnesscollective.